Last week we looked at the author's note, and we just read a few lines from the beginning of the poem. Maybe now we could just go through the contents, what is in this poem. If you look on the page after the author's note. So it's a big book. It's almost 24,000 lines. And these 24,000 lines are divided up. They're divided up into 3 parts. So there are 3 parts, and the parts are divided up into books. 12 books. This is actually a kind of tradition that an epic poem is often divided up into 12 books. Sri Aurobindo didn't start out to write 12 books, but that's how it worked out in the end, that there were 12 books. And the books are divided up into cantos. And the canto, which means song in Italian. So, and the cantos are divided up into sections. Each of these sections is has a particular theme. So we will be starting with part 1, which has in it 3 books. Book 1, Book 2, and Book 3. Book 1 is called the Book of Beginnings. And it has 5 cantos in it. The first canto is called The Symbol Dawn. The title of the book is A Legend, Savitri, a Legend and a Symbol. I mentioned last week that that word legend is there because of this ancient tale of Shraddhavan and Savitri, which appears in the Mahabharata, and which Sri Aurobindo says is much, much older than the Mahabharata, that in fact it comes from Vedic times. And he says that the incidents which it recounts are supposed to have happened way back at the dawn of human history. So in that time, in the dawn of human history, people thought in symbols, not so much in words and ideas as the modern mind does. They saw everything around them as symbolic expressions of divine powers and truths. And Sri Aurobindo uses this symbolic language very much in this poem. What would the dawn symbolize to you? Yes, it's a beginning. It's rather a special beginning. It's the coming of the light into darkness. No, we've been in darkness. We've been asleep. So it's dawn is a time of new light coming and of waking up. And we can experience some kind of a dawn inside ourselves at certain times in our life. When we first begin to become aware of our soul, that can be like a kind of dawn, a new light coming, or other significant events in our life. So that's how Sri Aurobindo starts his poem, with a total darkness, that darkest hour before the dawn. And then he describes the coming of the dawn in very, very beautiful language. That is in the first section, the coming of the dawn and the animals and the birds waking up in the forest, and human beings waking up too. Human beings who don't experience this waking up in the same joyful way as the birds and the animals seem to do. The birds start up their dawn chorus. We can hear it every morning. We don't know whether they're really enjoying themselves, if they're feeling very happy, but they seem to be. It's as if they are singing in joy, and that, oh, the night is over and the new day is here. But human beings experience the waking up in the morning somewhat differently. Often we want to go back to sleep. We think, oh my God, what a dreadful day lies in front of me. I wish I didn't have to wake up now. So he expresses something of this. And in the second section of the poem, he describes Savitri waking up. And for her, this is a very, very painful waking up, because this is the day when she knows that Satyavan, her beloved husband, is doomed to die. So that's how the poem starts. It starts with the day when Satyavan must die, the dawn on that day. And it's very interesting that the poem ends on the late evening of the same day, when everything has changed and the dawn is not full of terrors and foreboding, it is full of promise. So it all takes all the action of these 12 books fitted into this one day, the day when Satyavan must die. In the second canto, Sri Aurobindo introduces us to Savitri. Who is she? What is she like? And finally, at the end of the canto, he tells us that she is going to have to face death and fate on behalf of humanity, and that she will win a great victory. It's not like a detective story where we are reading it and wondering what is going to happen, because right at the very beginning, he has told us that Savitri is going to win a great victory for the whole of humanity. But then, as in many films nowadays, he does a flashback. That is, he goes back to before the beginning of the story. He goes back to the time when Savitri was to be born. How did it come about that this wonderful being Savitri has come into the world? It has come about because of her father, King Asvapati. And all the rest of part 1 of the poem is about King Asvapati. We don't hear any more about Savitri until right the middle of the book. So it tells about this king. In the traditional story, he's a king, he has 2 queens, but he doesn't have any children. And he very, very much wants to have 100 sons. Kings in those days, they needed to have many sons in order to command their armies and administer their kingdoms and keep things going. And so that is his wish. And in order to gain that wish, he does tapasya. He makes an inner spiritual effort. In the traditional story, he does this for 18 years to win the blessings of the goddess Savitri, the goddess of the supreme truth. So it's only after 18 years and at the end of Book 3 that we've passed through King Asvapati's whole yoga. In Book 1 we just have 3 cantos. We have 5 altogether. Canto 1 is about the symbol dawn, Canto 2 is about Savitri, and then comes the yoga of the king. And that comes in 2 stages, the yoga of the soul's release and the yoga of the spirit's freedom and greatness. And in between those comes one very special canto, Book 1, Canto 4, which is called The Secret Knowledge. This is the canto which tells in a relatively short form what knowledge King Asvapati gained by his tapasya. And at the beginning of Canto 5, Sri Aurobindo tells us that Asvapati was the first human being to gain this secret knowledge. And this secret knowledge, which is described in Canto 4, is the basis of the worldview and the spiritual philosophy that Sri Aurobindo is sharing with us in this poem. So in that way, we can almost read it by itself to know about Sri Aurobindo's worldview and his spiritual philosophy and the basis of his yoga. We can think of it as a kind of Sri Aurobindo Upanishad, a sharing of spiritual knowledge. And as a result of that knowledge, at the end of Canto 5, King Asvapati sees a vision of many, many, many planes of existence and consciousness. It's described as a ladder. And this is the golden ladder linking the highest levels of the spirit with the lowest levels of inconscient matter. And this is the golden ladder which joins the spirit's extremes, the highest levels of consciousness and the lowest ones. And it's possible for the soul to move up and down this ladder. And that is what Sri Aurobindo shows Asvapati doing in Book 2. He explores these different levels of consciousness, these worlds. So Book 2 is called the Book of the Traveller of the Worlds. And in that first of all, he sees like a mountain these levels of consciousness. He can't see the top. And he starts to move up. So he's starting from our material world. And first he explores the kingdom of subtle matter. Here we're in the world of gross matter. But there's a world of subtle matter which is invisible to our physical eyes. That's a very, very important world supporting our world, everything in it and everything that happens here. And the next level are the worlds of life. So Sri Aurobindo explores the different levels and worlds of life in 6 cantos. The first one's called The Glory and the Fall of Life. And the second one's called The Kingdoms of the Little Life, which is very, very interesting from the point of view of evolution. How did life evolve in matter? And the Godheads of the little life. Who are the beings and spirits who are influencing this little life, influencing us. We should be aware that there are spirits and beings who are influencing us from the invisible worlds in our life. And then there are the kingdoms and the Godheads of the greater life who rule or influence all the higher manifestations of life. The art and the music and the poetry and the higher expressions of the life force. He can see all those wonderful worlds, but he can't really enter in to why there's a limitation, why it's not possible to go further, and why there's so much distortion and pain and suffering in the life that we experience. He wants to find out what is behind that, and is there a solution? So in order to do that, instead of trying, where he finds he can't go any higher, he has to go back to the basis. So the next canto is called The Descent into Night. And there are two very, very painful, dreadful cantos of the descent into night. It's really a descent into hell. No? And he has to explore the world of falsehood and see and know the mother of evil and the sons of darkness. And it's like a kind of death. It's almost as if he has to die. Only his spirit can survive. He can only go through this by the light of his spirit. But then finally, when he gets to the very, very bottom, he has a wonderful realization of the divine presence everywhere. And that experience releases him from the illusions and problems of life. And he doesn't have to do anything. It's as if he's just projected into the paradise of the life gods. It's absolutely wonderful, healing and beautiful world. But it's one of the shortest cantos in the whole poem. He doesn't stay there very long, just long enough to heal some of these spiritual wounds that he's received in the lower levels. Then he has to go further. He has to explore the kingdoms of the mind. So first the little mind, which we are very familiar with. Beautifully described are the three levels of the little mind. And then there are two higher levels. And then he goes on to the greater mind. It's the mind above ours, but from which our mind has come. And so it is also influencing us very much. And he moves on higher to another level of mind, the heavens of the ideal. This is one of the most beautiful cantos in the poem. We love it very much. It tells us about the lovely kingdoms of the deathless rose and the powerful kingdoms of the deathless flame, the flame of will. So these are two ways that help humanity to progress. And moving further from there, he comes into the self of mind. That is, from the mind level, the higher mind level, he experiences the silent self, which is supporting all these levels of existence. And at first it's a wonderful liberation and a release. But then he finds that even this is a kind of limitation and a prison, and that it seems to make all the life of the world unreal. And it seems as if this is that existence is a kind of prison that we can't escape from, and that the only escape, the only way of escape would be ceasing to exist, dissolving our individuality, ceasing to exist. This is a very well-known spiritual experience, and Sri Aurobindo describes it elsewhere in the poem too. But in Sri Aurobindo's teaching, in Sri Aurobindo's life, this experience was the beginning of his yoga, not the end. And in his yoga, there's much further to go after that experience. So for Asvapati, what happens is that he is most beautifully invited into the world of soul, the psychic world. Again, it's one of the most beautiful cantos, and in it, in one of the sections, Sri Aurobindo describes Asvapati seeing the human souls, the souls of those who once lived on earth, sleeping. They are sleeping between births, and they are assimilating everything that they've experienced and learned in their previous birth, and they are dreaming and preparing their next birth, what they will do next. And then he moves further on this world of soul, and there at the end of the canto, for the first time, he has a clear face-to-face glimpse of the Supreme Divine Mother. And she removes her veil a little bit. He gets a glimpse of her face, and that wipes him out completely. He's completely overwhelmed, and he falls into trance. But when he wakes up, he finds that this vision of the Mother has enabled him to move on to a higher level of knowledge that he couldn't reach before. He goes into the kingdoms of the greater knowledge. And that's the last canto of Book 2. But it's not the end of Asvapati's yoga. He's passed through all these levels of universal existence, and he finds that he's still not satisfied. He's glimpsed the Mother, but where is she? How can he find her? How can he come close to her? So the first canto is called The Pursuit of the Unknowable. And there he comes again into contact with this silent self, but on a much higher level, not on the mind level, much beyond. And it seems again as if this unknowable is the ultimate reality. But in Canto Two, he's told, no, this is not the ultimate reality. It looks like an end, but it's in fact a gate. You have to go beyond this. You have experienced the eternal no, which liberates you from all the illusions of the world. But now you have to go further and find the eternal yes. And in that canto, the Divine Mother appears to him. He feels her in a much more intimate way and surrenders completely to her. And in the next canto, he is given a vision of what the future can be. The house of the spirit, first he experiences that, what it's like, this heaven of the spirit, and then from there he's shown the new world, the new creation, which is described in a very, very moving way because we can all recognize this world. That's the world that we are all longing for, that we're all waiting to become part of. And from there, he sees our world, our confused world of suffering and darkness. And again, there's a very, very beautiful description of how he's shown that he himself, in himself, he can create a link between that world of the new creation and the world as it exists. And in the last canto of Book 3, the mother appears to him fully, and she congratulates him, and she says, what you have won is for you. You will never lose these realizations. But don't ask this for the whole of humanity. It's not time. Humanity is not ready. Wait. It'll all come true in time. So you would think that maybe he can accept that, but he can't. He tells her, look, I know all this is going to happen, but it's taking such a long time, and we are not feeling your action and your presence. It's so difficult for us. Please, won't you incarnate something of yourself to come to earth and be with us and to help to move the whole thing forward more quickly? And she says, yes. She promises that Savitri will be born and that Savitri, his daughter, will fulfill his aspiration. So that's the end of part 1. Part 2 tells the story of Savitri. From her birth in Canto One, through her growing up, when she reaches marriageable age, nobody has come to claim her hand in marriage. So her father tells her, you will have to go out and travel through the worlds and find your life partner. And so she does that. She goes traveling through all the countries and the lands, very beautifully described. And in the next book, Book 5, the book of love, on her journey, on the edge of a forest, almost she would have passed by and missed him. There she sees Shraddhavan standing on the edge of the forest. And he's there in a place where he would normally never be at that time of day. But there he is. She sees him and they meet and they fall in love. And Sri Aurobindo gives a wonderful description of what love really is and what love means for human beings. It's our connection with the divine. So at the end of Book 5, they have promised to marry. They've had even a kind of union and a spiritual marriage there in the forest. And she says, now I have to go back and tell my father that I found my life's partner. So she returns to her father's palace, promising to come back. And Book 6 is the book of fate. When she reaches her father's palace, there is a visitor there. This visitor is called Narad. He's a famous character in Indian mythology. He's a half-divine being. He can move freely between heaven and earth. And he's a musician. He's forever singing the praises of Lord Vishnu, the maintainer and supporter of the world. So when she reaches her father's palace, Narad is there. So then there's a conversation between Narad, Savitri's mother and father, and Savitri herself. She has to share her great news that she has met Satyavan. He is the son of a king who has been exiled from his kingdom because he has become blind. In those days, a king couldn't rule if he had any disability. So he's been exiled from his kingdom. He's living like a hermit in the woods with his wife and his young son. And the parents accept. Yes, he's a prince, he's the right class, and Savitri has chosen him, that's quite okay. And then they ask Narad to give his blessings to the marriage. But there's some hesitation. He doesn't immediately give his blessing. So Savitri's mother presses him. She says, if there's anything wrong with this marriage, please tell us. It's much better for us to know now. So many things can go wrong in marriage. So please tell us. The other thing about Narad is that he can see into the future. He can see the past and the present and the future. So when she really presses him, he reveals, he says, this Satyavan, he's in every way a suitable husband for Savitri. He has all good qualities. He matches her in every way. Only, very unfortunately, he's destined to die in 12 months from today. So then, of course, the parents tell her, no, now you've made a mistake, you must go and find somebody else. But she says, I can't make a mistake. My soul has chosen. I've seen the divine in Satyavan. So I'm going to go through with it. If it's just for a year, then it's just for a year. But I feel that there is something more to come. So they have to agree. Here, Sri Aurobindo inserts a Canto Two of Book 6, which doesn't really have much to do with the story. It's called The Problem of Pain. Here, I've lost my place. The Way of Fate and the Problem of Pain. Savitri's mother is so upset, and she demands to know how can such a fate come to my beautiful, innocent daughter Savitri? And why is there suffering in the world? And your God, Narad, is he responsible for all this? So Sri Aurobindo takes the opportunity to explain to us, to her. Narad explains in great detail what pain means in the world and how it is necessary for the future evolution. And he ends by saying that Savitri is a special soul, a special being, and she can deal with this fate of hers. So don't obstruct her anymore. Give your blessing and let her marry Satyavan. So the next book is the book of yoga. It starts with Savitri's marriage procession, accompanying her to the forest hermitage where Satyavan lives with his parents, and then the friends and relations, they go away and leave Satyavan. This canto is called The Joy of Union, the ordeal of the foreknowledge of death, and the heart's grief and pain. The first part of the canto is about the joy of union, the joy of Savitri and Satyavan being married, living together, united. But then the weather changes, the rainy season comes, and Savitri remembers that there's only 12 months, and now perhaps 2 or 3 have already passed. And then begins her ordeal, this painful test of knowing in advance that Satyavan must die. This is almost something superhuman. No, Mother says that we are protected by not knowing what's going to happen, because human beings we can't bear. We wouldn't be able to go on if we would know. But Savitri, because she is such a strong being, she has to go through this ordeal. And Sri Aurobindo describes to us the suffering that she goes through, the heart's grief and pain. In the beginning of the second canto, as she's sitting in the night, nursing this grief in her heart, Satyavan is sleeping. A voice comes to her from high above that tells her, "Why are you doing this? You have come here with a mission. Now you have to wake up and find your soul, and then you will be able to overcome death." And at first she's reluctant, but then she's convinced. And so she continues sitting there in the night, looking for her soul. And this search for the soul continues over 3 more cantos. The rest of Canto Two, very, very interesting. She's given a vision of the whole history of the earth. And then the entry into the inner countries, looking deep into herself and seeing first we could say the subconscious of the physical body, and then the life levels, the 4 life forces, and then different levels of mind awareness. And having passed through those countries, she's moving higher on the way to find her soul. It's been pointed out to her, go this way. And there she meets the triple soul forces. Before she meets the soul itself, she meets these 3 forces that represent the soul in humanity. They are represented as 3 goddesses. One is the goddess of suffering, of pity, divine pity and compassion, who supports all the suffering of the earth. But she says, I can help, but I can't save. God gave me love and compassion, but He didn't give me the strength to save people. And when she finishes speaking, there's an echo from the human nature of this lower force of tamas, of helplessness and inertia and darkness, in the voice of the human beast who's full of resentment and hatred, but also helpless, impotent. And Savitri promises to that Madonna that now I have to find my soul, but when I've found my soul, I will come back, and then your pity and compassion will be united with a higher strength, and it will rule the world. It will unite human beings, the spirit of compassion. The next Madonna that she meets is the Madonna of might, of strength. She's a glorious, powerful figure, and she says, I will save the world if the world consents to be saved. But she says, human beings, don't listen to me. They don't take any notice of me. And again, there comes this echo, the echo of the arrogant man, vital man. He's described somewhat like the modern man who thinks he can do everything. But he can't save himself, and he can't save the world. And Savitri promises that she will come back, and she says, you are already powerful, but you need wisdom. I will bring you wisdom. And then the third Madonna is the Madonna of light and knowledge. She uplifts humanity through the power of higher consciousness. Savitri gives her a very special message. And then there's the mind, the human mind, which says, I'm human. I can never be anything but human. Just let me be human. Don't bother me until I fall asleep in oblivion. And Savitri's message to that Madonna is that it's not enough just to rain down the higher consciousness on human beings. Whatever higher levels of consciousness they reach, they will think it's their own achievement. What you have to do is to nurse and nourish in human beings their thirst for the eternal, for what is really lasting and true. And she says, you go on doing that, and I'm going on my journey, and when I come back, I will bring the divine power to help you. And then the next canto is, in fact, the finding of the soul. Beautiful canto with 3 sections in which Savitri finally meets and unites with her soul. And it's described how the soul the divine soul, the central being, is on a very high level. But that central soul knows all the sufferings and difficulties we have to face. So it sends a small part of itself into the depths of our heart, to help us face everything that we have to face. But Savitri sees these 2 parts, and she experiences that the little part and the big part, they rush into each other, they unite, and this is the realization of her soul. And then she finds herself back in the forest, sitting beside sleeping Shraddhavan, but her soul has blossomed, she's conscious of it, and from her soul she implores that higher being of hers to enter into her and take possession completely of her being. And it does. So in the next canto, Canto 6, first this makes a tremendous difference to her, this happiness of union with the soul. And she's no longer worrying about Shraddhavan. She has visions of him in the future as a great king. They will always be close together. But then one night, as she's sitting beside him, making her joy, Sri Aurobindo says, a link between earth and heaven, suddenly it's as if there's a tremendous black cloud that comes, and it seems to say no to all this wonderful psychic realization that she's had. It says, how can you think that you can live heaven here on earth? It's ridiculous. And I'm death, and I destroy everything. And the sound of destruction is in that voice. So that leaves her inner world laid waste, as if there's been a cyclone or a tsunami or something. But the same voice tells her, Savitri, you have not come here just to have a wonderful psychic realization for yourself. You have come here to do something for humanity. And that's why this experience has come to you. And now you have to take the next step in your yoga. You have to widen your consciousness so that it's so wide that even the destruction of this whole material universe would be just like a tiny little incident happening in one corner of your awareness. And to do that, the first thing you have to do is to silence your mind. And she's shown how to do that in several steps. And eventually the mind falls completely silent. She loses all self, all sense of individual existence. She becomes a silent spirit, pervading silent space. And it's as if at any moment she could go out of existence. It makes her perceive everything around in the world as just like, well, unreal, fake figures, things without substance or reality. But there is something real. She can't grasp or contact it, but behind all this there is something real. And that reality could absorb her back into itself, but it doesn't. Her body goes on working. She does everything she had to do without any will from her side. Just it happens. It just goes on happening. So of course this is based on Sri Aurobindo's own experience too. And that continues, as it did for him, for some time. Until in Canto 7, something happens. Again, from above, there comes in a thought or a word which changes everything. Instead of that sense of illusoriness of everything in the world, she sees that everything is real. It's all inhabited by a wonderful, loving, personal reality. And she herself is able to identify with that cosmic spirit and that cosmic consciousness. So that's Savitri's yoga. This is her preparation to face the death of Shraddhavan, which happens in the next book, Book 8. It's the shortest book. It has only 178 lines, I think. It was written at a very early time. Sri Aurobindo added just 20 lines in 1949, and that's the only link with the rest of the book. So they go into the forest, and Shraddhavan dies. The god of death comes to take him away. But because of this tapasya that she's done, this realization, this yoga that she's gone through, and all the knowledge and power that it has given her, Savitri is able to follow. When the god of death takes Shraddhavan's soul out of his body and leads him away, she's able to follow. And she goes on following all through Book 9, the Book of Eternal Night, and Book 10, the Book of the Double Twilight, which I won't describe in detail, but what they are is the counterpart in Sri Aurobindo's poem of young Savitri, the young wife, following her husband as death leads him away, and by her correct words and correct behavior and correct understanding, finally convincing the god of death to return her husband to her. It doesn't quite work like that in this poem. At the end of Book 10, Savitri's divine self descends into her, and the god of death is dissolved. But nothing changes. She and Satyavan are side by side, nothing moves. Some change has to come from a higher will. They move into the world of everlasting day. After the night and the twilight, the everlasting day. And there she finds the Godhead, the form of the divine who is supporting that world, and she recognizes that it's the same one that she has been facing as death, as denial, as night. But now they can meet as equals. They smile at each other. They have a long conversation. And that wonderful Godhead explains to her all the reasons why it's impossible for Satyavan to return to life on earth. But finally she's able to convince him that we have to go back together. It's no use me staying here with him, or one of us staying here and one of us going back to earth. We have this mission, and you yourself have given us this mission. So why are you not allowing it to happen? And then he tells her, yes, you are the creative word. You are the mother. Whatever you choose will happen. But you can't choose here, he says. You will have to go to a much higher plane, beyond space and time, beyond the manifestation. And from there you must see how things are, and then you make your choice. So that's what she does. The climax of the poem is Savitri being offered the possibility to merge into the supreme divine, into the peace and the oneness and the bliss and something else. The stilled power of the supreme, into the silence. But instead she says, all these things that you're offering me, I want to have them. But I want to have them not for me, but for earth and men. And finally, he says, yes, everything you've asked, what you choose, I choose. Everything you've asked will be fulfilled. And the rest of Book 11 is his long prophecy of what this will mean for Savitri herself, and then for the whole world. And he tells her, descend to life with him thy heart desires. So he explains the role of Satyavan and Savitri and what their lives will mean for the earth in future, and how eventually the hour of God will come, the hour of the divine will come, and everything will change. The earthly life will become the life divine. So in the very end of Book 11, Savitri finds herself falling back to earth, carrying the soul of Satyavan in her heart, and then being absorbed into the earth atmosphere falling into trance. And in book 12, she wakes up. Satyavan's beside her, alive. It's afternoon. Throughout the book, he tells us what time of day it is. Satyavan dies at noontime. Now it's afternoon. And they wake up. She explains to him. He asks her, what has been happening? She explains to him. And then she says, it's coming towards evening. Now we must go back home. And let us go back into this world that's been given back to us. And let us give joy to all. That's what we have to do. And so they return. And as they're returning, as it becomes evening, suddenly there's a huge crowd of people with lights and horses and all in wonderful clothes. And in the front there's Dyumatsena. His eyesight has come back. His kingdom's been restored. They can return to the kingdom. And there's a very nice exchange at the end. And one of those priests and sages at the end asks her, and let me read those lines. They ask her, what is the power that has brought about all these miracles? No? The saving of Satyavan, the return of the kingdom, the return of sight. And this is what she replies. Awakened to the meaning of my heart, that to feel love and oneness is to live. And this, the magic of our golden change, is all the truth I know or seek, O sage. So they can't understand her. It's difficult for us to understand her. But this is the Mahavakya of Savitri. And then I'll just read, then they return, they're on their way back to the kingdom, huge procession. Numberless the stars swam on their shadowy field, describing in the gloom the ways of light. Then, while they skirted yet the southward verge, lost in the halo of her musing brows, night, splendid with the moon, dreaming in heaven, in silver peace, possessed her luminous reign. She brooded through her stillness on a thought, deep guarded in her mystic folds of light, and in her bosom nursed a greater dawn. The poem starts with the mind of night, the foreboding mind of night, wanting to prevent the dawn, to sink back into darkness and unconsciousness. But through the whole action of the poem, it promises that tomorrow there'll be a greater dawn. There's the promise of a greater dawn. Night has changed her character altogether. Now she's dreaming and nursing the dawn to come. So next week we'll go back to the beginning and start on the great journey. Thanks to Aurobindo.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So marvelous. Thank you.